People who have legally injured killed someone in self-defense. What is your story? Not me, but my aunt. About 2 years into her first marriage, her husband beat her black and blue one night. She didn't call the cops, didn't seek treatment, just went to bed and told him the next time he laid a hand on her she would kill him. About 6 months later, he did, so she did. He took a swing, broke 2 of her ribs. She grabbed a kitchen knife and shoved it into his eye. She called a friend who was a local sheriff's deputy, who told her to call 911 and then immediately call a lawyer. No charges. The broken ribs helped prove self-defense. Here we are 20 years later and that sheriff's deputy is now my Uncle Gary. We go hunting together every couple years when we can find time. My parents' story. During their wedding reception, 2 men with masks entered and announced they'd be robbing them. Everyone thought it was a prank, laughed it off, and went on with the party. They pulled out guns and said it was no joke. Everyone was on the ground on all fours, and they went around collecting wallets and jewelry from the guests. They came up to my grandpa, I've never met him, and saw what looked like a wallet in his breast pocket. It was a date book, and asked him to hand over his wallet. He said he didn't have one. Course he didn't, and was punched in the stomach. My uncle looked up at the guy, and had a gun put to his forehead and was told, "I'm going to blow your fucking brains out." My uncle grabbed the gun and turned around, pulling the guy's face into his shoulder. My grandpa and others tackled him down and held him down. The second guy went running off, and my dad ran track on college, chased after him and tackles him. Him and others pin him down. Police come and everyone is excited that the ordeal is over. The cops say something like this is going to take a bit longer though, there was a death. Freaking out, my family asks who and find out the first guy was suffocated from being held down. Later it was confirmed he was on cocaine and died from something related to his heart. My great uncle lived in a trailer in a rural area of Florida. A kid, 17, broke in one night and held him at knife point. He had no money and told the kid that. He also told the kid to leave or he will grab the shotgun next to him. Kid charged and slashed him, then he shot him dead. They ended up charging his friend, driving getaway car, with the murder. Turns out they robbed several trailers that night. Chose the wrong one. Not me, but my grandpa. When he lived in Mexico, he owned this one ranch where during the day, he had workers to maintain it because it was really big space, and there was lots of cattle, horses, etc. Anyway, one night he decided to stay and sleep at the main house in the ranch. He has his main house an hour away closer to the city and has his sister maintain the ranch house. Right before he went to bed, someone snuck onto the property before he decided to get alarms and other security systems, and the man tried to steal some of the money in the main house that he knew was there because he was friends with one of the workers and was working with him to try and keep the money. He sneaks on and my grandpa was still awake about to go to bed, and he sees him from the second-story window creeping up to the house and sees an object in his hands. My grandpa goes and grabs his shotgun and goes to the front porch and yells at him, and he just charged. My grandpa aimed the gun and shot him in the chest. He also ended up firing the worker he found out was working with him. Not me, but my dad had to knock someone out with a pipe wrench. My dad was in his mid-20s and had just started up his HVAC company. It was late at night. One of his customers called about his tenants complaining the air was out. At 3 AM, my dad, as a recent business startup all on his own, got dressed and went out on the call. He got there and fixed the AC, and when he was leaving, it was a bit of a rundown, poverty-stricken area. A man who was clearly drunk thought he was with his girlfriend, who was living in the house my dad just worked on. My dad, obviously, was like, "No, I'm the HVAC repair guy." Dude pulls out a knife and charges my dad, and my dad simply swings at him with what was in his hand, which was a wrench. Knocked the guy in the temple and he was out cold. Dad kinda panicked and jumped into his van and sped off. Nothing ever came of it, so I assume the guy was okay, aside from a massive headache. I'm a medic and firefighter. We got called to a rollover accident New Year's morning. Obviously a drunk driver. It was 3 AM. We were first on scene, walked up to the car, and found a gun pointed at my face. I grabbed his arm, smashed it into the A-post repeatedly. My partner didn't even know what was going on. The guy dropped the gun. I told me partner to get it, and I ripped the guy from the car. He's screaming I broke his arm. The police get there. I told them he had a gun and pulled it on me. They grab him and throw him in their car. He was arrested, taken to the hospital so his arm could be splintered. Was charged with driving impaired and assault. Pleads guilty and went to jail for a couple of years. Obligatory not me, but my grandpa, but here goes. Grandpa was something else. Arrested several times during Prohibition for running stills in the hills of Appalachia and other colorful sorts of stuff. Anyway, many years after that, he was in a bar somewhere in town. Some young arsehole got in his face, as young arseholes do. Words were exchanged, the young guy pulled out a gun, and he stuck it in my grandpa's face. Grandpa didn't have time to determine the extent of the young man's commitment to his actions, so he decided to pull out his gun and kill him right there. Cops were called, witnesses were interviewed, and Grandpa was free to go. Grandpa didn't have time to determine the extent of the young man's commitment to his actions. I read this in the best narrator's voice and your grandpa is brilliant. My 18-year-old brother and his, then 18-year-old wife lived next door to a family with a teenage son. She started an affair with that 17-year-old son. One day, the son barged into my brother's place and started attacking him. My brother was packing and moving BC. He was leaving for the army. He had pulled down a metal pole in a closet to make room for boxes. My brother grabbed that pole and used it to fight off the teen. The kid ran out bleeding. My brother called my dad. We lived a few blocks down the street, and my dad jumped into action. He grabbed one of his hunting shotguns and some bird ammo. He ran out the door to the car screaming for us to call 911. My mom and I ran after him. BC, we were clueless and wanted to see where he was headed. My mom was on the phone with the cop, and they were dispatching the one cop that we had in our town. We start running down the road to my brother's place. BC, we saw dad pull in. As we get near, we hear a gunshot and see my dad and brother taking cover behind the car doors they'd opened to climb in and leave. Another shot goes off and we can see it isn't my dad firing. The teen had run home next door and was bleeding, and told his dad my brother was trying to kill him. His dad grabbed his handgun and saw my dad and brother leaving and started shooting. That's the gunfire mom and I heard. Dumbass kept running towards my dad's car. I saw my dad position his shotgun in the car window and fire one round. Then, he and my brother climbed in the car and started driving back at us home. We all finally get together, and dad says he shot the man in the stomach. Chaos breaks out on our street. Ambulance, cops, and people. They take the other dad away to the hospital and my dad into custody. Within hours, we find out that the man has died. The bird shot hit his liver and he bled out. My dad was charged with murder and we started receiving death threats. In the cover of night, we are moved. We hid for days until my dad was bonded out. Ended up moving far away. Grand jury was convened and I had to testify to what I saw. After all the evidence and testimony were presented, my father wasn't charged. BC, the grand jury decided it was self-defense. I now have contact with some friends from that town BC of social media. We never talk about what happened or anything. Things carry on as normal. That day is forever burned into my memory. I was living in Queens while attending Fordham U in the Bronx. Came off the train one night. There was a young busker at the end of the platform, rapping about how if everyone just gave a little money God would give a little back. I looked straight ahead, ignored him, tried to power walk past him. I'm a small female. He was a much bigger man. He grabbed me by the arm and started trying to charm me for money. I was pulling away, trying to make him let go. He wouldn't. I started screaming and then I just started stabbing him with my keys. I always carried my keys with the tips stuck out between my fingers, because it was a not so nice neighborhood, and I always got home late. It didn't kill him but it hurt enough that he let me go. This little immigrant woman had been coming up the platform and heard me screaming, so she came running and started hitting him with umbrella. So now he's on the ground bleeding and being sacked about his personage by a 75-year-old Ukrainian woman who introduced herself to me as Olga. Police came, arrested him, gave me and my new friend a pat on the back and a ride home. Fortunately, it was the only time I was ever assaulted when I lived in Queens. When I lived near campus in the Bronx, it was a lot worse. My roommate was insane.